All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis. My name's Pietro, and I'm flying solo this episode. Well, not completely solo. I do have a guest, so you're not going to have to listen to my intolerable monologuing for a whole episode straight. I'm sure I'll find times to monologue throughout it. I always do, but Max is unavailable today, so it'll be just me, joined by another stellar candidate, stellar libertarian candidate who's running in the very imminently upcoming state election. He's running for the seat of Southern Metropolitan, and I'm very eager to speak to him and to get to know him a little bit better. So without further ado, I'm going to invite into the conversation Matt Ford, for Southern Metropolitan. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good, Pietro. Good to be with you.
Very good to have you. Very good to have you. Now, I will start off with a dirty rumor that I heard about you. Now, I'll let you explain it a little bit, but I've heard that your golfing prowess has led to being a member of the same golf club or same whatever golfing community as a certain infamous premier of the state of Victoria. Is this true?
Yeah, I must admit it is absolutely true that he who shall not be named he's a member of the same club as me. I'm not a member of his club. He's a member of my club.
Who was there first?
I was by a number of years.
Okay.
So I have had the dubious honour of meeting and speaking to him a few years ago. Before he went full commie dictator, but yeah, the rumours are true. What can I say? I'm a shameful elitist.
There was a time before he was a commie dictator. Was he already a commie?
He perhaps it wasn't as obvious. The red was still very much within him, but he maybe just cloaked it a little bit better than he has in the last few years.
Yeah, well, it's the power that brings out the very best or worst of the commies. Depends which way you look at it. Is it one of those fancy like golf clubs where the members have to vote to allow someone into the golf club, or they have to be sponsored by two existing members or something like that?
That is exactly how it works. And I really, unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail, but his application process wasn't quite as rigorous as some of us plebs was when we joined.
Of course. There's corruption in everything that he does and everything that he touches.
Those are your words, not mine.
And I'll not let you stitch yourself up with saying something untoward just before an election that I very much hope you win. So I'll let you not incriminate yourself there. What's his golf game like?
Look, probably as far as pollies go, it's pretty good. But I mean, it's not amazing for someone who's, I think I don't know how tall he is, but he's not a small guy. He's a bit of a powder puff, so it's a bit. And that was before his back injury, so who knows what he's like now? But it's one of the, it's funny if we're gonna talk about it. I'll just talk about it. It's one of the reasons why I don't find him completely intimidating. As much as I might disagree with him on lots of things, I don't find him intimidating because when you've seen someone sort of try and fail at something the way that I have seen him try and fail at golf, there's no intimidation really. Like he's not as squeaky clean on the course as he is in a press conference with all his budding journos asking him his softball questions, put it that way.
That's very interesting. I would love to see him as a little bit less of the, all-powerful aura that he gives out to to everyone. It'd be quite nice to see him taken down a peg or two.
That's right.
That first you spoke to him a little bit, I'm guessing, when you met him. What was he like? What was that what's the person like?
Look, nothing in the setting that we were at. There was nothing outrageous, or he was probably on. Politicians, they're always on show. They're always putting on a performance. They're very rarely drop their guard in a public or semi-private setting, as it was. it was I probably spoke to him for 4 or 5 minutes, maybe. Nothing. This would have been about. This was not long after he actually first became premier, so it would have been about mid 2015, I reckon.
Okay.
So well before the full-on tyranny that took us all down. At that point, he was just sort of your everyday Labor type.
Just a run-of-the-mill tyrant, not a.
That's right. Like acceptable Aussie tyrant. That's pretty much it. Yeah. So I don't really have any great pearls of gossip or wisdom from that conversation, but the general impression was just that's what he was. I was a little bit more politically in tune then than perhaps a lot of people were, even though I was still quite young. So I kind of saw through it a little bit, but little did I know what was in store for us.
But you're better at golf than him.
Comfortably. And I say, if anyone ever wants to fact check me on that, then I'm happy to provide as much evidence as required.
All right. Well, yeah, Anthony Curcio offered to try and fight Matthew Guy and Dan Andrews in our second episode. You can beat him at golf, a much more civilized display of physical dominance. I think that's
right. I might even shake their hands at the end of the round too, just to
really
keep it
stick it
civil.
into him.
Yeah.
Well, enough about our esteemed premier. I'm here to talk about you, Matt. So the first thing that we're always interested in, and part of it is because hearing about people's journey to libertarianism might offer some sort of guide to us as libertarians as to how we might best approach bringing new people into the movement. Because the first thing you realize when you're a libertarian is how few libertarians there are, and you want to bring more of them into the fold. So I'd be very interested to hear how your journey towards becoming first politically interested and then part of our so beautiful and moral philosophy, how that journey went.
I guess probably in sort of long form, I grew up in the sort of southern metro area in the Bayside suburbs. I was in a very, very liberal family, but not really politically engaged or interested. Like, politics didn't really come up at the dinner table all that much. I've got an older brother, mum and dad. Like, we never really discussed it. Occasionally at extended family Christmas lunches and all that sort of thing. Like most people, we talk about the news of the day and all that sort of thing, but we weren't a particularly political family. I'm the first person in my extended family history that I know of that's ever been on a ballot paper and like really got involved. I think a few of my relatives might have been in the Young Liberals when they were younger, but nothing too extensive or active. And I was mainly interested in sport when I was young and still very much am, but it wasn't until I got into uni that I sort of started thinking a little bit more about it. And it was actually probably American politics that interested me first. And it was, so I started uni, showing my age, in 2010. Probably wasn't until maybe during the second year of my studies that I started following it quite closely. And they had their presidential election was in 2012, and I was perhaps not as enraptured with then President Obama as a lot of people my age. So I sort of started really getting into it.
And I suppose 2012 was what Obama Romney was the.
That's right. Yeah.
And
right.
I mean, Romney, as far as a Republican goes, wasn't particularly impressive either. He was very run-of-the-mill statist as well.
Yeah, not exactly the kind of guy that's going to get you jumping out of bed to go vote. I don't think that election was much of a surprise in terms of the result. But obviously, having come from a sort of a liberal family background, I was sort of inclined towards the Republicans, and also the little bit of contrarian in me wanted to say, well, actually, I don't know that Obama is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So that was sort of my introduction. I became a real fan, interestingly enough, of Christopher Hitchens, who certainly wasn't a libertarian in full scope, but he was, I think, a civil libertarian and was absolutely 100% in favour of things like freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of and freedom from religion, all that sort of thing. Basically, the First Amendment to constitution. So he was sort of my gateway drug, if you like, into politics and current affairs and religion, questions of religion, all that sort of thing. And from there, I just sort of built on. And as I said, I was really more interested in American politics than Australian politics because I found it quite boring by comparison.
Yeah.
And then we had an election, sort of fast forwarding through years. I was maintained my interest in all those things. We had an election in 2013 here, and David Leyonhjelm got elected to the Senate for the Lib Dems in New South Wales. And it was actually, and so he sort of popped up on my radar because of that. And you might remember the infamous budget that Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey passed down in it was the first one. So I think it was early 2014. That was, the horrifying, we're going to have to pay for uni degrees and all that sort of horrifying stuff. And it was probably not so much that budget that killed the Liberal Party off for me as a viable party to follow or join or whatever. It was more the way that they responded to and dealt with the criticism that they got for trying it, which of course came from all the usual suspects on the ABC, blah, blah, blah. And they basically just capitulated. They put in almost no effort in trying to really fight it out and persuade people and, prove their chops as genuine conservatives or liberal-minded people, economically sensible. They basically gave up after a few months, said sorry, and then the year after they passed a usual tax and spend mainstream budget as though the whole debt and deficit emergency that they correctly spoke about for years on end just disappeared. So I became, once they lost that fight, or in fact, once they just failed to fight, I just said, well, these guys they're just a joke, basically. Like, why would I vote for them when I can vote for the Labor Party? They're just the same. And then, of course, I discovered Leyonhjelm and the Liberal Democrats, and I thought, here we go. Here's a party that speaks my language. And I suppose, having heard a lot of people in our rapidly growing party, particularly here in Victoria, talk about how the last couple of years really pushed them towards our party, towards libertarianism, towards those sorts of ideas. Mine was a bit more of a slow burn. There wasn't a single moment that absolutely nailed it for me that, I'm a libertarian, I need to fight for this. It wasn't mandates or lockdowns or seeing my kids shut out of school, that sort of thing. It was a bit more of an academic pursuit. And then I discovered, obviously, our party, and I realized that, hey, what they're talking about, that's sort of, they're articulating things that I think in a way that I hadn't previously even realized that I thought it. So policy areas that I hadn't thought of, but I was suspicious of the way that they were being dealt with by the government at the time, and most of them still are. I thought, yeah, these guys, they're speaking my language. So I think the first time I cast a vote for them was at the 2014 state election. And I've joined the party. I then, a couple of days later, jetted off for a few weeks, or actually a couple of months in the US, and then came back, joined up as a student still, and started attending branch meetings in Camberwell. At that point, we just had one branch in Victoria, really. Now we've got branches all over the city and all over the state. And yeah, sort of kept up my involvement, volunteered for campaigns the years sort of in the next couple of years. Like for example, 2016, we had a federal election. I volunteered for our candidate for the seat of Higgins. A couple of years later, I was David Limerick's number 2 in the state election, where he, of course, got up. Council elections, and those were in 2020. Here in the utopian Green Republic of Yarra City Council. God, don't get me started on that. And then fast forward to this year, we've had back-to-back elections. This time I was the candidate for the seat of Higgins, and now I'm the lead candidate for Southern Metro. So,
well, that's quite a journey. It's interesting to hear you say that Leyonhjelm was, well, maybe not your gateway drug, but I suppose the first hard drug to get you into libertarianism, if we follow that that analogy, because I've heard that from a few other people, both in these podcasts and just speaking to them, and it kind of it reaffirms in me the the need for elected members to kind of spruik the message whilst having that platform, because sometimes I'm kind of doubtful of how much there really is that we can achieve within the game of politics, especially as such a minor party, which I would hope is in its infancy compared to what the Liberal Democrats might grow into. But yeah, it kind of it reassures me that even just having an elected member, a single senator, or for example, what Tim and David have done over the last 2 years, actually grows the message really, really broadly and brings so many people in, probably more than people who just kind of on their own tottering way at some point encounter something libertarian and come on board because of that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Just the hard, cold reality of it is that if you don't have someone who has a platform, whether it's a senator or a upper house member in a state parliament or that sort of thing, your reach is just infinitely smaller. And I mean, you think about, it's been basically coming up to 10 years, and we've had continuous representative in either the federal parliament, in the Senate, obviously David and Tim here in Victoria, and we had Aaron Stonehouse in WA. So for a small party, that's a pretty impressive record. And it's still difficult. You still, as a candidate, you still run into people who don't recognise us, or they think we're the Liberals or that sort of thing. It's still an uphill battle with elected representation to get noticed and to get your message out. And I often wonder, if Lionhelm hadn't had got into the Senate, what would I be doing now? What party would I be involved in? Would I be involved at all? Perhaps not. So
do you think you would have gotten to libertarianism without Lionhelm?
I would certainly like to think that I would have, because I know that it's absolutely what I truly believe in. This is not this isn't a junket. This isn't a game. This is really who I am, and the way I sort of view the world. So I'd like to think that I would have. I have no idea how long it would have taken me without it. Maybe I have no idea what steps would have been involved. Maybe I would have flung my hat in with another party for a while and become as disillusioned with them as I did with the Liberals. And maybe then eventually I found the Lib Dems. That's an interesting counterfactual. Perhaps in my next life, we'll see. I'll go down that route and let you know what happens. But as I said, I'm sure people have experienced this in other aspects, but as a politically interested person, it really hit home when a person, and obviously the party behind him, were telling you things that you already know, but you didn't know that you knew them.
Or didn't know that you were allowed to say necessarily. A lot of what not only David Lionhelm, but even a lot of what Tim Quilty and David Limbrick have said, especially over the last 2 years, are things that maybe you kind of privately had an inkling of, but it wasn't allowable opinion. And then, someone in a position of authority, I suppose, or someone with, who is supposed to be the voice of represent an electorate, when they say that, it gives a whole lot more credence to it. And you're like, oh, wait, I am allowed to think these things. And actually they're true when I examine that. So,
And I suppose, and this is probably where we start getting into the real philosophy behind libertarianism. I suppose it was the fact that he and the party, generally speaking, combined sort of a conservative ethos in terms of, well, certainly economically, but more than that, more the idea of personal choice and responsibility. And I think the responsibility part of that is what a lot of the so-called freedom parties at the moment overlook, is that it's actually about you not just being able to do what you want, basically. You're responsible for the outcomes. And I suppose hearing him on, talk about issues like legalizing cannabis, same-sex marriage, which obviously at the time was a big issue, and that sort of thing, but then also talk about, cutting welfare and lowering taxes and reducing regulation and all that sort of thing. The way that he articulated and the way that our party articulates a combination, I think, of the best of the so-called conservative, mainstream right-wing side of things, and also the progressive, philosophically consistent idea that if you should be able to marry who you want to marry, as long as they also want to marry you. And if you want to take a load off in your backyard and have a joint, well, who are you hurting? So it was probably that amalgamation of those two types of ideas that did it for me. And I thought, it's not a contradiction to say that you believe in low taxes, less regulation, all that sort of thing, and also to say, hey, if people want to make lifestyle choices that I don't agree with or that I'm not going to make myself, that's also consistent. You're not contradicting yourself.
Yeah, I think not only is it not a contradiction, it's actually the only completely consistent worldview. In the same way that I should be allowed to do what I like with my life, it's the only thing that I have been given in this world. At the same time, I shouldn't have to pay for someone else's, but I also shouldn't have to expect someone else to pay for my way or anything, or expect some sort of overbearing authority to look after the collective. So there's definitely a lot there. And I think sometimes some of the goofiest representations of libertarians in the media, or I see this a lot in the US, but possibly as libertarianism maybe becomes more widespread here, is this idea that these libertarians are this kind of happy-go-lucky, no consequences, do whatever you want, kind of hedonistic,
a bit frivolous as well.
Yeah. Which actually, if you look at most of libertarians, that's, as you said, it's personal responsibility, and it's there's a lot more of family values, in the sense of I don't expect the government to look after me and my own. It's me who looks after me and my own. I'm not a part of this great big social construct. I'm part of my family or my community or whatnot. It's not initially apparent when people first think of libertarianism, how it's portrayed.
I mean, look, probably I think all political movements and parties and ideas are going to be caricatured by their opponents, because politics is a zero-sum game. So, I think I know what you're talking about in the US. Often the harshest critics of the Libertarian Party are Republicans, even though those two parties are probably more aligned than the Libertarians are with the Democrats. Certainly, I think that is true now. It's the Republicans that go hardest at them, but they characterize them as they just want to smoke weed and whatever. Well, that's how you characterize them, and that's obviously one plank of their policy. But there's more to it than that. So I think that a lot of the criticisms are, disingenuous, because unfortunately politics involves a lot of dishonesty. It's just the way it is. But there's also a sense that people don't necessarily understand the full picture. So the thing that I love about libertarianism is that you can actually be quite personally conservative, or you could be personally very progressive. But as long as you accept the idea that your lifestyle choices, your worldview don't need to be imposed on other people, you're basically a libertarian, right? You mightn't, all the stuff about what the tax rate should be specifically and what regulations we should have on the books. That's the minutiae of politics and legislation. If your perspective, if your personality is that, I don't agree with what they're doing, but they can do it because they're not hurting me or anything, you're basically a libertarian. So it's a far more all-encompassing worldview than people realize. And I think probably I think they say that everyone's a libertarian about at least one thing. You talk to anyone, there's Greens everywhere where I live, or you've looked at, say, older liberal voting, typically conservative types who might also be a little bit religious or have that background. They're going to be libertarian on one thing, at least. So as long as you can if you're talking to them, or as a party, if we're trying to broadcast our message to them, as long as you can crack that part of the gum nut and get in there, then particularly if they're still young, obviously sometimes older people are a bit set in their ways. That's all right. That's okay. But perhaps younger people are a little bit more open to the fact, hey, I believe this because I believe that, I believe in gay marriage and legalizing cannabis because, that's my choice. But I think that previously I thought that, businesses should be regulated and the government should own everything. Well, if you can maintain the pressure and build the argument that personal choice and liberty and freedom on the personal level is good and acceptable and desired, well, then you have a chance of getting them perhaps later on down the line that, hey, if people want to run their businesses a certain way, you're not obliged to buy from them. They should be able to do that. So I guess having rambled on a little bit, I guess my point is that it's a far more all-encompassing, moral, as you said, consistent philosophy than perhaps our opponents or people who just don't know us quite as well give us credit for.
There's also, I think, a problem that comes with democracy in the state and any involvement in terms of, any party or whatever, is, as you said, everyone's libertarian on at least one thing. And most parties, I think, I'm sure even the Labor Party on something, there's something you could find that they're libertarian on. But as soon as you become involved with, actually governing or taking power or winning seats or whatever, and, the process in Parliament, whatever libertarian view a party holds tends to sort of naturally get put on the back burner because the state is just so geared towards expanding, and those things that they hold that aren't so libertarian naturally find the most momentum. And, it's kind of regardless of whether it's liberal who hold probably quite a few libertarian views, at least they supposedly do, or Labor or even Greens, it's always their most statist policies that end up actually being enacted.
Well, the Liberal Party is a great example of that. I mean, I've lost count of how many times I've been at, a polling booth or whatever, and speaking to Liberal volunteers or that sort of thing. And, we love you guys, the Lib Dems. Like we wish we could be more like you. And well, it's like, if that's what you think, then why aren't you trying it at least? You're going the other way. So, I mean, as I said, politics is a zero-sum game. It's naturally about winning for the major parties, and that's sort of, at all costs. And if a politician has to say something on a Monday because it's popular, and then he has to say something on a Tuesday that's the exact philosophical opposite of what he said on the Monday, he'll say it.
Yeah.
Our previous prime minister was actually a great or a terrible example of that. There's no courage, there's no vision, there's no genuine commitment to a philosophy. The typical politician doesn't have any hills that they're willing to die on. They just want to scrape by, win power, keep power, all that sort of thing. But thankfully, there's a few of us around to keep them honest and point that out. Then.
Well, the Scott Morrison example is there's one example that springs to mind, like really blatantly, that he in 2021 when mandates were the talk of the town. There was the whole protest movement, and they were bringing around vaccine mandates for just about every employment, and he kept on saying, at press conferences and everything, vocally, I don't believe that mandates should be, it's an un-Australian thing to do. No one should have, you have the right to your bodily autonomy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because in his internal polling or whatever machinations they had, that was shown to be popular enough to talk about, to try and win you a sect of votes, but certainly not popular enough to do anything about. So he never did anything to try and turn the tide against that. That to me is the most blatant example of saying the one thing that'll win you tote number of votes, and trying to figure out exactly how you can cut up society and cut up people to gather enough votes without losing enough, without ever actually standing for anything.
Well, that's actually an interesting example because, as far as I understand it, the only way that the state governments were able to implement the mandates that they did was because the federal government, I believe, released the necessary information off what they call the National Immunisation Register, I think it is. And so basically the federal government, whatever the former Prime Minister was saying, essentially aided and abetted what happened in states like ours. So whether or not he was just lying, which is possible, whether or not he was just clueless, which is also possible, or whether or not he honestly believed that and someone behind the scenes, essentially betrayed whatever trust they might have had, and then he had to go along with it to not look like a incompetent leader. Whatever the answer is, it doesn't look good. But yeah, the fact of the matter is that the federal government did aid and abet what our state governments did with regards to mandates. And as for him personally, I don't think that there was ever a day where his primary concern wasn't saying something that was popular. I think even by political, and we don't want to spend the whole time talking about other politicians, but I think even by the standards of today's politics, he was sort of abnormally shallow and hollow and visionless, and eventually he got the electoral treatment that he and his party deserved.
Yeah, and we've been replaced by someone probably even worse.
Well, yeah, I don't mean. Yes, I think so.
Not necessarily in terms of being so two-faced, but as far as the problems that we're going to be facing as a society in terms of the economy and the state of the rampant either inflation or recession that we're heading towards, it certainly doesn't help.
It was a bit like the famous South Park episode where Americans have the choice between the douche and the turd sandwich.
Yeah.
Kind of been Australian politics for the last 15 years, I think.
Yeah. Which that kind of brings me very naturally to something that I wanted to ask you is, given how disgusting and rotten and horrible politics is, why are you trying to get into it?
Well, that is a good question, but it's probably got a few layers from my personal point of view. Firstly, it's something that interests me greatly. I hate being bored, so I love learning about things, and I love things that are interesting. And there's an endless array of things to learn about politics. It's a daily update of all kinds of things. I love debating and arguing. I'll sometimes get into quite heated arguments with my mates just because that's what I enjoy doing. It's not a personal thing, as they all know. So I guess politics, if I was to ever be an elected representative, who knows, maybe in a couple of weeks I will be, it would certainly scratch those itches. Obviously, there's the desire to make the place that you live, your state, your country, your neighbourhood, a better place. I don't have kids, but obviously, or hopefully, one day I will, to make it a better place for them. So, and look, I'm not going to lie. There's a burning contempt I have for the people who are doing it currently. So I want to stick it up them and replace them, or if I'm not replacing them all entirely, or if our party's not replacing them all entirely, be a real needle in their side. So I guess there's an array of reasons. Some are about me, others are about hopefully making Australia, Victoria, Melbourne a better place.
Yeah. But I mean, something that because when you talk about like an interest in politics, I find it's, I didn't really make this connection in my head before I got involved in politics as much as I have in this last year. But there's the whole aspect of politics, which is like talking about like political philosophy and stuff, which is like really engaging and really like, I mean, even a socialist who reads or a communist who reads Karl Marx, those that do read it, there's those moments when they're realizing or thinking they're realizing truths about the world and how the reasons why the world is the way it is and how the world could be better. And there's this whole, it's kind of a really internal and very academic intellectual pursuit, and that sort of political philosophy aspect is actually completely and entirely removed from like the game of politics, which even in my short experience, and certainly not as in depth as someone, if they were to be elected, is so just dirty and disgusting and like horrific. Under an election, the games that parties play in terms of deals and backstabs and preferencing and all the rest of it is like it's night and day, these two parts of philosophy. And I think I used to just kind of think of it all as one big pile, whereas really they're two very distinct things. So do you think you'll enjoy the political games as much, or have you been enjoying that as much?
Well, to the extent that I can't say that I've been personally involved in too much political gamesmanship, because at the end of the day, I've been a candidate for a minor party, and most of the other parties spend their time gamesmanshiping each other, not worrying about us. But to be honest with you, yeah, I think I would. I think that's what before when I said, it scratches a lot of itches. I do really like the theoretical, philosophical. I love history, and all that sort of thing. And politics is obviously entwined in all of that. I do love that aspect of it, but I also do. I think I would, if I were to be involved at an elected level, involve the little bits of intrigue, and you got to play the game. Like, it's all well and good to be a Puritan, whatever party or whatever philosophy you adhere to, but if you're going to be involved, you got to play it, and you got to be able to win. You got to have some success, and like obviously things like preference deals is a good example of that. Like, sometimes you'll talk to parties you despise about preferences because that's what you need to do to play the game and to win and to get elected. There's no point. You can be as pure blood as you want. If you're not elected to Parliament, then you're not doing anything. If you're not even a chance of getting elected to Parliament, well, then it's completely irrelevant. So I think the two sides of the coin, the sort of academic side of it, and the sort of the realpolitik, the gamesmanship, I think I would enjoy both. I mean, I spent my whole childhood playing heaps of sport. In a way, politics is just a slightly more highbrow game of cricket or footy. It's just you're testing different wits instead of it's brains more than brawn, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, for sure. So in terms of actually being elected, as being an upper house candidate, there is a realistic, if not likely, but at least it's a possibility that you will be elected come November 26th or whenever they finish all the counting of preferences and the rest of it. Given that, let's assume for a second that we aren't such a minor party, and that we could perhaps have either form government or have a strong balance of power or something like that. What would you say are the biggest or most pressing issues that a libertarian elected to Parliament could tackle that face Australia or face Victoria right now?
Well, I'll keep it to Victoria for
obvious reasons. Victoria,
I think firstly, well, look, there's the policy side of things, and we can run through, the economic policies and social policies and all that sort of thing. But probably the main aim of the game, if we were in that sort of a position, let's say we hold balance of power on the crossbench in the upper house. So we get David and Tim are back in, myself and maybe one or two others, that sort of thing. So basically any legislation that's passing needs to go through us. I think the first port of call would be that we'd have to prove, not so much to the other parliamentarians, but prove to the people, those who elected us and those who are perhaps skeptical about us but want to see how we go, prove that we're the real deal. Like, prove that we're not just another bunch of lying charlatans who will say and do whatever we want.
Which in a way, David and Tim being incumbents have kind of paved the way for that a lot as well. Like the Liberal Democrats, or libertarians broadly in Parliament, have a reputation for being staunchly, philosophically aligned to the point that, you can't buy them for this particular issue or that particular issue.
And I guess if we found ourselves in an even greater position of power and parliamentary predominance, then it would be very hard for the media and for the sort of the average punter on the street who pays a little bit of attention to what's going on to ignore us. Like we'd be almost the center of attention, because the government of the day will pass whatever they pass in the lower house, obviously. And then the real battle begins, and in that situation, we would be at the center of that. And so a whole lot of people who maybe still haven't heard of us or haven't heard about how David and Tim have operated the last few years wouldn't have no choice but basically to follow along, and hopefully in that situation we would prove our mettle, prove our chops, so to speak. So in terms of issues, where do you start, really? But
that's the question. Where would you start? Day one, or
Yeah, I'm just thinking ahead strategically. You'd probably want to tackle something that you could completely wrap the libertarian idea and parliamentary framework around, and use that as an example to people. And then, a bit like what I said before, once you sort of crack the nut and you prove the point of our philosophy and how it's so beneficial, then you can start tackling even more and more. So what issue that would be, I don't know.
I suppose not even, I understand like the strategic aspect of what is one little issue that we could actually have a significant sway in, and then use that to, push ourselves onto the national or statewide scale. I kind of more so, less strategic was what I had in mind. What is the most pressing thing that libertarians should be answering about the world, right? Because my view is that right now, libertarians aren't going to form government, but we really, really need them to, because there are some things that right now are in various areas that are really horrific and imminently dangerous to everyone. So what would be your number one, your main areas?
Well, then in that case, it would simply have to be the economy. And there's obviously a lot of different sectors to that. But without a functioning economy, you don't really have a functioning society. And without a functioning society, lots of bad things can happen. The history of economics is basically the history of mankind, really. When it's good, things go well. When it's not so good, things go terribly. So in Victoria, that's obviously, we've racked up just a quite frankly unbelievable level of debt. And that is going to come at a cost, more so than what debt naturally does. And it's already biting. And that's probably going to get worse, which is a shame to say it, but things are probably going to get worse before they get better. So I think the priority has to be getting our economy functioning, not just so that people can earn more money and all that sort of thing, and put downward pressure on prices, but all of that stuff eventually rolls into how your society functions, how people interact with one another, how people feel about being a Melburnian or being a Victorian, being an Australian. If you don't have a functioning economy, you don't have a functioning society for very long. So I guess in Victoria's case, it would be doing everything we could, cutting spending, reducing taxes, reducing regulation, getting our economy moving again in the right direction, which it clearly is not at the moment. We're living on not just borrowed money, but borrowed time. And so I guess the key point is the economy. And what do they say? It's who famously said it? It's the economy, stupid.
It is someone. I can't think of it, but yeah,
I have a feeling it might have been one of Bill Clinton's advisors or someone like that. Early 90s American politics. Someone will know who it is, but I think the absolute, if we're really knuckling down to the real nitty gritty, then it would be the economy and everything associated with that.
That could even from a strategic point, I mean, there's a very real possibility that in the next 4 years, the bite that we're starting to feel becomes really not just unmanageable, but like intolerable to the average person. And I don't know if there weren't any libertarians. I mean, hopefully there are, and hopefully you're one of them. But if there weren't, I don't know if the Liberal Party would have the stones to, return to its original economic policies. But it's certainly an argument for, if there are libertarians such as yourself and Dave and Tim and whoever else, to at least be loud enough and hold that, either the balance of power or something close to it, to be able to shift, the Overton window, so that the Liberals can have that conversation as well, because that's probably the most realistic way we're actually going to get any short-term change. So, I mean, possibly even from a strategic point, it has to become not just unmanageable, but at the forefront of the average person's mind, which there's every chance that it will be.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was born, I'm just in my early 30s, so I've never, in my generation, our generation, like we've never really known true hardship. Like our whole life, and even people who are 10 or 15 years older than us, that sort of thing, like we've had it so unbelievably good. And even if you're a conscientious, politically engaged, historically aware person, you can't help but take that for granted a little bit. At the end of the day, there's no teacher like experience, and most of us have not experienced true adversity, true hardship. So I certainly wouldn't want to be wishing economic Armageddon on us in order to rebound back in the right direction. But, a little bit of the pain that we're feeling now is probably a precursor for what's going to come. And maybe then people will realize the sort of error of our ways, that you can't just have everything for free. Government spending money is not good. Like it doesn't make sense economically, but it's also not good for you. Certainly not in the long term. And that we need to change course. And I mean, I can't see the current generation of Liberal Party people doing anything, because they've all hitched their wagon to what is essential, soft left, Labor light policies. But if we can sort of maintain the sanity, hold the ground, we can pull people not just towards us, but hopefully pull the other parties from off the edge of the cliff, and then everyone will be better off, whether we're in government or not. Who knows?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't wish for people to be in economic hardships either, certainly, because it would also affect
That's
me.
right.
And as you said, neither of us have ever been in a time of true hardship. I was more, I think they're called, they're referred to as collapsitarians, libertarians who, eagerly await the collapse because they'll be proven right about everything. I'm not one of those either, but I guess
accelerationist, I think, is another term. Basically, in other words, let's go as fast as we can towards the wall or the floor, whatever you want to, or whatever analogy you want to use, and then we've hit rock bottom. Let's get going in the right direction. So
maybe the Greens are the best libertarians of all of us, because they're the maximum accelerationists.
Inadvertently, that could be very true. Yes, they mightn't realize it, but they might be our greatest allies.
And we're actually the ones holding the reins back on the most libertarian thing that could potentially happen.
That's right. We're inadvertently helping each other. Yeah. But I guess, as I've always said, the thing about democracy that is probably overlooked is that you sort of, as a country, as a collective, sorry to use that term on this podcast, but we reap what we sow. So long as we vote into power people that don't have the right priorities in mind, don't know what they're talking about, just don't care because they want to keep getting re-elected, well then we're going to suffer the consequences of that. But then by the same token, however you get there, if you start voting people into power who have good ideas and who are willing to fight for them and implement them, well then we'll all be better off. Obviously, we're a bit biased as to who we think that should be and who
we're also correct. We're also correct, though, so keep that in mind.
We are demonstrably correct. It's not actually a subjective interpretation. It's true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's going to be the most depressing "I told you so" of all time is just as things do inevitably get worse. Is we've been saying this all along.
Yeah, we'll be sitting in our cardboard box on the street, yelling at the people over the other side of the street. We told you so. Look at us. Yeah,
I feel so good knowing that I was right.
That's right. Yeah.
In absolute destitute poverty.
That's right. Maybe we'll have a double-story cardboard box. That just to
just to keep our status.
That's right. That's right.
I think it's like since the Industrial Revolution, and obviously like basically the free market launching humanity into prosperity. I'm not sure, there might be some exceptions throughout there, but like virtually every generation has been wealthier than their parents. And, this is very much shaping up to be the first time that, already now where modern, people nowadays looking to buy a home, for the first time, they're not able to, whereas their parents and their grandparents were wealthier and able to. So that's an interesting kind of insight into the way things are going. Because if you talk about society broadly, we do have this assumption that we're the most prosperous that we've ever been, and everyone's got the most money that we've ever had. But in terms of like our actual ability to make our way into the world and to purchase things, and to that's definitely something that, and I think it's due entirely to the state's expansion and the state's absolute destruction of monetary of the currency, that this is the first time that we aren't going to be able to be more prosperous than our parents.
Well, I think I'm not an economic historian, but I'm pretty sure you're right that certainly in the West, the Anglosphere, we'll talk about that pretty much every generation has possibly obviously the world wars caused a bit of havoc,
and the Great Depression, I was thinking as well, might be a blip there as well. But apart from those,
like if you talk about in generations, typically a block of 25 years, they say, pretty much it's been a step upwards in the right direction. But we're starting to have plateaued, and if anything, and you mentioned housing. That is something that is on my mind. I mean, I don't own a house, but I'd very much like to. I've had my partner and I, like, we've both had good, steady, good jobs. Like we're not working part-time in a cafe. Like we've got, well paid.
No offense to people working part-time in a cafe, but yeah.
No, but I mean, if you work, well, look, back in the good old days, if I can use that expression, if you're working part-time in a cafe, you're probably still able to buy a house.
Yeah.
Whereas now you can have 2 solid jobs and you're still struggling. And if you can buy a house, then you're probably having to make a lot of sacrifices elsewhere. Then you obviously throw kids and everything into the mix, and it becomes even harder. So it's interesting how so many of these areas of life that have become objectively harder, more expensive, are the result of, as you said, the expansion of the state, shoddy policy, intervening in things where they shouldn't be. But the reaction, unfortunately, seems to be, well, you talk about housing affordability. Well, what's the government going to do about it? Well, haven't they done enough? Like, the government's the reason why you and me and lots of us are struggling to buy our first homes. It's not because the government hasn't done enough. It's because they've done far too much. They need to step back, not step forward.
You can see the allure of why young people who maybe don't know or haven't haven't gained enough life experience, let's call it, to know enough about these things, why they're drawn to the left, because they're coming out of school or universities or having their jobs or whatever, and they're realizing, I can't buy a house, I can't pay my rent, all of these things are, the cost of groceries, all this is astronomically going up, and it's a lot more easy to market a politician or a party by saying, well, we'll pay for these things, we'll give you these things, and that'll solve your issue. And on a surface level, like, well, of course I'm going to vote left, because I'm not a psychopath. I don't hate poor people. I'm almost in that realm myself. And it's completely missing the point, but it's a lot harder to try and explain the message of actually it's this exact path of rampant spending, and that is the reason that your money is worth nothing. So how does a libertarian offer a message about, let's say, housing or rent or whatever, that maybe younger people who haven't thought about this before might be able to understand?
Well, I guess it's not easy, but I suppose the trick to it is that you provide the explanation, the policy detail, all that's the rationale, and ultimately you have to let the person in question come to that conclusion themselves. Like you're not going to force someone into the libertarian framework. They almost need to get there themselves, right? You're just laying the breadcrumbs, and eventually they'll find their way. And it might take a few more years of them, I don't want to say suffering, but dealing with a problem that they find inconvenient and it's making their life harder. And then they think, oh yeah, that's we've got to change course, and this is a course that makes sense to me. So I don't think there's a silver bullet where you can just turn someone who's leaning very heavily in the left statist direction, and then they come full circle back to you. Because as we said before, a lot of these people already hold positions that are quite libertarian, but they just haven't figured out how to apply it to everything yet, or they haven't been shown how it does apply. And you kind of just need to let them make their own way. And if you, as an individual, but also as a political party, if we're consistent and we hold our ground, eventually people will come to see, hey, those guys have been on the money all this time. I've only just noticed, but there they are. We should listen to them probably about a few other things too. You mentioned about before about people's tendency to vote for politicians and parties that say, we're going to do all this stuff. And how do we combat that? Well, I mean, that's where the real sort of academic side of politics obviously gives way to the cynical, dirty, dishonest side of politics. And once again, there's nothing you can really do to completely U-turn that. You kind of just need to wait, be persistent, not cave in, not compromise on your positions and your values, and wait for people to find you again. So it's always a hard sell as a candidate going up to someone and saying, if they come to you, what do you believe? What are you going to do? Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you the room to do what you want to do. That's a much harder sell, even though people like us get it, for the average person on the street, than walking up to a politician or a candidate and saying, what are you going to do for me? Oh, well, we're going to make this free, and everyone's going to get $250 because that'll solve an inflation-based cost of living crisis, of course. We're going to just invest more money in schools and hospitals, which is just spending money. So we're naturally, we make life a bit hard for ourselves as political candidates when we're libertarian, but we're doing the right thing. Eventually, we've just got to wait for the public to come back around to us, keep doing what we're doing. And I think whether that's forming government in the future, who knows, hopefully, but at least maintaining our presence, and we might become the sort of, I hate using right wing and left wing, but maybe in 10 or 15 years we'll be the right wing equivalent of the Greens. And the Greens aren't going to form government, God help us. But
knock on wood.
Yeah, but like them or loathe them, they have a big role to play in Australian politics. Yeah. And hopefully we can have a similar sized, if not bigger role, just coming from a different direction.
Yeah, and I mean it is difficult, and I mean we know about it obviously being involved, but it is difficult because the Greens, it's a lot easier for them to expand their notoriety because they are running with the grain of state expansion as it is, where we are directly against it, and that's a very hard position to try and, as you said, sell to the public. But it's interesting you said, like, sorry, you go.
I was going to say, they say politics is downstream from culture. So, and obviously there's a bit of a feedback loop in there, of course, but the Greens and lots of other sort of populist parties, whether they're left wing or right wing, they're trying to make the most of what they can out of the political end of that stream, whereas we're trying to trek up the hill to the top of it and deal with the culture, which is not an easy task and is probably going to take a little while. But once again, it's there's really no other option. Otherwise,
well, that's right. What if not us, who?
That's right. That's right.
I was going to say, it's interesting that you said, all we can do is kind of sow the seeds of, let people eventually come around to our view, because we've been consistent and we've been correct over time. But they have to get to that view themselves rather than be able to, sell them, here you go, here's a free whatever. And that is interesting, because a lot of people that I've spoken to who have turned to libertarian recently, they describe that process as, it was this one little stitch that they pulled the thread on, and that started unraveling the rest of it. And then eventually, once it starts unraveling, you realize, oh shit, they're correct about everything. So, I mean, I don't think that's a bad approach necessarily. And I do think that the easiest way to sow as many seeds as we possibly can is by having a voice in Parliament, just because of the nature of the way that our society is run, because it is so concentrated. The authority is so concentrated. So, I mean, there's a positive spin there, because that we do have the opportunity at least to sow the seeds, and hopefully.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I would say, and speaking from obviously our experience here in Melbourne and Victoria, and the experience of the party and the way it's grown, is that the state makes mistakes. If I can pardon the French, the state fucks up, right? And what, as horrifying as what some of the things that have happened here over the last few years have been, the light at the end of the tunnel is that our party has gotten bigger because of it. So once again, it's a hard thing to have to go through adversity or tyranny, but there can be a point to it. And sometimes, a bit like I mentioned before with us in the Greens, like sometimes our worst enemy is our best friend. And so if the state, federal, state, whatever, keeps making mistakes and people keep suffering and it keeps impacting them, well, we can benefit from that. And in turn, we can help other people benefit if our ideas and policies and philosophy are more thoroughly implemented.
I wanted to finish on a less sombering thought, because all of this is, well, I mean, it's simultaneously depressing and, positive as well, because, there is a way out, at least. There is a possibility to make some improvements. But let's finish on a more positive note. Obviously, we're a little bit, we're well and truly on the way into, pre-polling booths being open. People are going to the election booths and casting their votes. Have you had much of a chance to go onto the hustings yourself? What's the feel on the ground level? Yeah,
I've been campaigning for a couple of weeks now, or more than a couple of weeks, certainly more than a month. And the feeling, the overriding sense that I get from people that I've spoken to is one of anger, disillusionment, and just, I think, generally being fed up with the way things are going, and that's speaking to people in public. I've spent time in our region encompasses a few different areas. I've been in Hawthorne, Caulfield, had a great weekend down in Oakley, completely different areas, sort of demographically, socioeconomically, and certainly not an echo chamber like at a party branch meeting. Speaking to people on the street in public. And the one thing that just about they all have in common is they're just pissed off. And some of them are, of course, pissed off at a certain individual we may have spoken about at the start of this podcast. But I think there's just a general contempt for politics, the system, the parties. I've had people who I've started talking with who've just said, "Oh, no, you guys are all the same." And obviously, I try and talk to them and sell how maybe we're not the same. And sometimes it doesn't work. Like sometimes people have just had enough. so once again, it's not an optimistic start to the answer to your question, but I think if people are pissed off, it means they're paying attention. And if people are paying attention, it means they're willing to do something about it. And if they're willing to do something about it, well, hopefully in a few weeks' time and even on into the future, they're willing to do something that has a positive outcome.
Yeah.
So if they can parlay that anger and frustration into voting for parties like ours and candidates like me as a stepping stone, well, that's positive. So I don't think there's any getting around the downsides. But if they're used as proper motivation, we can get to a better spot. And I'm personally confident that we as a party will do well this election, which will be getting David and Tim re-elected will be a great achievement. It's not. I don't think that's for a small party. I don't think that's a pass mark. I think that's like a distinction to get two members re-elected in a really what could be a bit of a circus of an upper house. If we can do that, then we're really proving our bona fides as a party that's here to stay. And over the next 4 years, there's going to be another federal election coming up. There's always an election coming up. We can start to make some real change. I'd like to think that maybe we've sort of stemmed the bleeding just a little bit, and now we can start patching things up, and we'll be winning the 100-meter sprint in no time.
Well, I mean, I certainly hope so, and I think that you're right in that the biggest ally to state expansion through both major parties is a disinterested, sleepy mass of population, which I think Australia has been for a long time. At least up until COVID, I think is maybe what's shaken it out of it. So a disillusioned and angry public is, I think, much better for us to make some headway and to possibly get more people to start thinking about, what is liberty? Why do we need it? Why is it so absolutely vital?
It's not just some words that you've read in a textbook when you're at school or whatever, or a word that politicians use to get you to vote for them. It's a real thing. It's not just how our society works. It's who we are as people. That's why it makes, generally speaking, our countries like ours a good place to live, certainly compared with human history. So we should push the assets that we have to the limit. We shouldn't be restricting them, like freedom and liberty and choice and the ability to make your own way is what that's why people travel and sometimes travel dangerously to try and live in countries like ours. We should be exaggerating those assets as much as we can, not doing the opposite.
Absolutely. We have passed the hour mark by a little bit, so we better wrap it up there. Matt, was there any last message you wanted to leave our viewers before going?
Well, there's a lot, but I'll simply say this. Our party has an enormously high rate of retention. So if you're feeling disillusioned, if you're politically interested or you're just got politically interested, I highly recommend you check us out. If you can cast us a vote in the next few weeks, that's also obviously a great thing. But I support the Lib Dems and you won't regret it would be my message. So also, having watched some of your other episodes, I just want to say hi to all our mums out there who are watching. Thank you for putting up with us.
It's just my mum tonight because Max isn't on the episode. So
well, I'll send my mum the link and she can watch it too.
Perfect. All right. I will just say follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Spotify if you haven't done so already. Thanks so much for your time, Matt. I do very much hope that you get up and hopefully you'll jump on the podcast again as an elected member. That would be nice. I promise, my first promise, if I get elected, you'll get another interview with me. I've heard I shouldn't trust politicians' promises. So. You can trust me. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll catch you later. Thanks, Pietro.